Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I am so delighted to have a really special guest with us today. His name is Brian Johnson, and Brian is the founder and CEO of Heroic Public Benefit Corporation. And he is the author of Areté, Activate Your Heroic Potential, which I highly recommend for you to pick up. It's an incredible book. He is 50% philosopher, 50% CEO, and 101% committed to helping create a world in which 51% of humanity is flourishing by the year 2051. As a founder and CEO, he's built and sold 2 social platforms. As a philosopher and teacher, he's helped millions of people from around the world. He's trained over 10,000 heroic coaches from over 100 countries and created a protocol that science says changes lives. He lives in the country outside of Austin, Texas, with his wife, Alexandra, and their 2 amazing kids, Emerson and Eleanor, that I briefly got to meet before we started this recording, and they are adorable. So welcome, Brian.
Jared, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. So, speaking of kids, right? We when we think of kids, we think of future. And we think not only of their potential, but also of the potential of our planet. And so tell me, what is your wish for our planet?
Well, I tattooed my body with my ultimate wish, which is a world in which 51% of humanity, as you said in the introductory bio, 51% of humanity flourishing by the year 2051, which is a target, a mission that I got, a moonshot goal, if you will, from Martin Seligman, the founder of the positive psychology movement, who in the year 2000, when they founded that movement, said, can we create the academic, research to help create that world? I thought it was crazy when I first heard it. I still think it's crazy. And that's what I've dedicated my life to. 1% at a time, us coming together and moving from theory to practice to mastery is my ultimate, mission in life. And I look down every day and remind myself of that 25 plus year goal. And that's what I'd like to see and to help create.
How do you define flourishing, both on an individual level, but also on a planetary level? How will you know that that goal is achieved?
Yeah, I mean, there's a scale we use. We've tested everything we do in our coaching program in the app. It's the Ed Diener scale of flourishing, which measures your well-being. It's a simple 8-question, intake form. Takes you 2 minutes to complete, and you can get a really good sense of someone's meaning, purpose, relationships, sense of self-efficacy and confidence and hope and optimism for the future. 8 questions, and you can measure someone's well-being and flourishing. So when I say that, I mean it. I mean, we're measuring someone's flourishing, and can we do that at scale? And then the way I think we do it is part of what we talked about in the intro, which is those of us who are blessed to be in conversations like this and to lead organizations, the way I know many of your listeners and community lead their organizations, we each need to be the change we want to see, not in some, boy, that sounds nice and warm and fuzzy way, but in a very, very practical, pragmatic way.
Yeah, I believe it. And I believe that also energetically, because I believe that the world is a projection of our own energy. And so when we lead ourselves first, then everything else changes. And so tell us, what does Areté have to do with this mission, with this goal? What does it mean, and how will it get us there?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ways to pronounce it, but the way that I've come to pronounce it is Areté. But the word, it's one of those weird words that how do you spell it, and how do you pronounce it? And even that is interesting because it's a beautiful word. This was the essence of ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, yet somehow it disappeared from our cultural vocabulary. And frankly, I think that in itself is interesting as a talking point. But if you ask the ancient Greek philosophers like Aristotle and Socrates and Plato, or the ancient Roman Stoics like Aurelius and Epictetus and Seneca, how to live a good life, they would have answered you in a single word. They would have told you to live with Areté. So the word Areté translates as virtue or excellence, but has a deeper meaning, something closer to being your best self moment to moment to moment. So that's the one-word summation of my life's work, having studied ancient wisdom and modern science for half of the last 25 years, fully immersed. I tattooed my body with it. and it felt appropriate to make it the title of the book.
Awesome. And so for those leaders of our world, whether they're organizational leaders or what we would call change makers, right, with this desire to make our world a better place and a willingness to commit themselves and to take the actions to make it happen, how can they apply this into their daily lives?
Yeah, I mean, one of the other frames I use to make it more practical, and I use the story of walking with my then 10-year-old son, who likes chess and wants to be a grandmaster, and he didn't want to do certain things that he knew he did want to do because he was feeling, what one feels when they're a little bit out of their comfort zone. But anyway, we went on a walk that I talk about, and I framed it up as, look, Areté is virtue or excellence and being your best self moment to moment to moment. And I like to kind of visually represent it with a line at my eye height, right? And then if there's a line below it, and that top line represents who you're capable of being. If in any given moment you're capable of being a certain version of yourself, and in that moment there's a gap between who you could have been and who you actually were, it's in that gap, in that moment. And I'm not talking about who you think you should have been if you really showed up over the last 25 years. I'm talking about in any given moment, you're capable of being a certain type of person. And if you're being something less than that, that gap is where regret, anxiety, disillusionment, depression exists. It's simultaneously more nuanced than that, but as simple as that. And when you close the gap and you express the best version of yourself moment to moment to moment, you live with Areté, you experience what the ancients called the summum bonum, the greatest good of life, which is a deep sense of meaning and purpose and joy. And again, we know if you step back just half an inch from your experience, as Viktor Frankl would say, between a stimulus and your response, there's a gap. In that gap is your freedom. So we have the wisdom we need. We just need to slow down and say, is what I'm doing right now the expression of the best version of myself? And the more consistently we can close that gap, the more consistently we're going to activate, I would say, our heroic potential, inspire those that we lead to do the same, etc.
So here's the kicker, because when we're in a depleted state, right, be it a state of regret, of a funk, right, a down, if you will, right, experiencing some negative emotion, it can be very challenging at times to have that choice point, right? Of, what is the best version of myself? And let me move toward that, even in a little micro way in the moment, right? Interrupt whatever cycle I'm in. And so how does one do that when they're not even capable of seeing or experiencing that choice point?
Yeah. Physiology drives psychology. So I'm relentless with our coaches and with our community. And in the book, as you know, talking about the basic fundamentals: eating, moving, sleeping, breathing, focusing. And if you're feeling enervated and burned out, which all of us experience at different levels at different times, some of us experience almost all the time. And again, I gave a talk on Mental Health Day recently. 80% of us, and I talked about invisible disabilities. It's obvious when someone has a physical disability. It's not as obvious when they have a mental disability. But 80% of us, roughly, are experiencing some level of anxiety, depression, burnout, et cetera. That's a big number. And that's tough to figure out, frankly. How do you solve for that, right? What is my purpose? I just feel overwhelmed and all these things. Well, step back, control the controllables is how I focus on it. How's your eating, your moving, your sleeping? Get your physiology right, which is driving a lot of your psychology. And for a lot of people, it's one more hour of sleep. If you're not getting the 7 hours of recommended sleep, that's the fastest way to literally change your life overnight. And even I experienced this over the last 72 hours. I traveled, as part of our book launch, and I got 5 hours of sleep, which I never do. I'm an 8-hour, I feel great at 8 hours, 7.5, diminished a bit, 7, prefer not to get that. Less than that, I'm just not the same person. So 5 hours of sleep, perfect, made up for it, the next day, and I was fine. But I've experienced what it feels like to feel on. And I can do things when I am well rested and energized that I literally can't even imagine doing when I'm not. And so we need to make the connection between the choices we're making in the most basic fundamental areas of our life and how the downstream psychological effects are connected to that. And then again, control the controllables. and build your life force, build your kind of energetic force, and those problems that are overwhelming become a lot more manageable.
I'm with you. I refer to this as momentum, right? When we have that energy, if you will. And one of the domains of resilience is very much of the physical, right? As you said, what we eat, or drink, how our exercise, our movement, and sleep, and so on. So one of the things that we spoke briefly about before we started to record is this concept of anti-fragile resilience, which I was very curious to learn more about. Can you tell our listeners what that means and how they can access it?
Yeah, so everything that we do has 7 objectives. The first objective, know the ultimate game. Most people are playing the wrong game, which also contributes to burnout, chasing the fame, the wealth, the hotness, the extrinsic factors. There are intrinsic motivation factors that you know and that most listening know about, but we want to focus on those. That's objective 1. Objective 2 is forging what I call anti-fragile confidence. So anti-fragile is a word coined by Nassim Taleb, the great intellectual. And he said, look, there's something way past resilience. So if you're fragile and life hits you hard, you break. If you're resilient, you can withstand more pressure, then you kind of break down, then you bounce back faster than most, which is better than being fragile. But it's not the optimal response to challenges. The optimal response to challenges is to be anti-fragile, where you literally get stronger the more you get pushed around. The metaphor he uses is the wind. The wind will extinguish a candle, but it will fuel a fire. The same exact wind, the same exact stress. So what did COVID do to you, right? And Jesus talked about this 2,000 years ago. Did you build your house on a foundation of rock, or did you build it on sand? If you have a strong, strong sense of who you are at your best and what you do, then when life hits you and the storms come, what do? Anyway, we want to develop a sense of what that looks like for us. And when life hits us, we want to double down on our protocol, which I'll actually go to. I pause for a moment there because anti-fragile confidence is kind of my extension of what my coach, Phil Stutz, calls emotional stamina. So emotional stamina, Phil Stutz was in the Netflix documentary with Jonah Hill called Stutz. I've worked with him 400 one-on-one coaching sessions. And in one of the early ones, he talked about emotional stamina. The emotional stamina is what I now call anti-fragile confidence. It's your ability to handle pain and uncertainty and hard work and not breaking down. And so I asked him, well, how do you develop more emotional stamina? And he said, it goes like this. The worse you feel, the more challenged you are, the more committed you are to your protocol. So the worse you feel, the more committed you are to your protocol. Now, that has 2 important components. The first presupposition is you have a protocol, that you actually know what you do when you're at your best. And that's a really, really important thing to know. So the best performers know what their fundamentals are, and they're relentlessly committed to them. A lot of people in the business world, executives, don't really have that clear of a sense of who they are when they're at their best. And then when life gets hard, we tend to spiral out and do the things we know we shouldn't be doing. So we've got to get clarity on our protocol. And we can talk about how I encourage people to do that. And then when life hits you, rather than do all the things you know you shouldn't be doing, you double down on the things you do when you're at your best. And then the wind doesn't extinguish your candle, it fuels your fire. And literally the things that used to break you down make you stronger. That's the essence of anti-fragility. And that's now a long answer to your question, but there's obviously a lot behind that. But that's what the most elite performers tend to come to me to talk to them about, whether it's in the sports world, the military world, or corporate executives.
I love it. And having clarity on that protocol, that which we're committed to is really important, because in that gap that you spoke about earlier, there's moments that we're in some form of a dip, especially during times of uncertainty and chaos and change. It is that clarity of our protocol that can create a healthy choice, because oftentimes when people have healthy choices and they know what to do and they know how to do it and it's accessible to them, they're much more likely to make that choice rather than an unhealthy choice to be able to close that gap. So how do we access our protocol?
Yeah, this is literally what I've dedicated my life to help people get clarity on who are you at your best. And our heroic app was built with this in mind. So that's what the heroic app does. It has been scientifically shown to change lives. But the simplest first step is get out a piece of paper, blank piece of paper, draw a line down the middle, and on the upper left put do, and on the upper right put don't. And then think back to a time in your life when you were at your best. Again, whether it was a day or a week or a month or a year or even a decade, what were you doing when you were at your absolute best? And what were you not doing when you were at your absolute best? Then you look at it and say, all right, what's the one thing on my do list that I did when I was at my best that I'm not currently doing, that if I did start doing it again consistently would most change my life? And then what's the thing on the don't list that if I stopped doing it would most change my life? And that's the fastest way to change your life, to stop doing the things you know you shouldn't be doing. So for me back in the day, different people have different habits, right? Some drink too much, some eat too much, some binge watch too much. Everyone's got their own kryptonite. My dad and his dad drank enough for me, so that's not my thing. But I used to stay up on the nights I knew I needed to go shut down and get a good night of sleep. I'm stressed. And I would spend more and more time looking at ESPN or watching some show or doing something I knew I shouldn't do, up for an extra hour or two, sleeping for an hour or two less, waking up feeling depleted, knowing psychologically I didn't do what was best, but getting clarity on the do's and the don'ts, identifying the one thing you could be doing and the one thing you know you could stop doing is the first step to doing that. And then we systematically kind of go deeper into it. But I come back to that all the time. Anytime I'm feeling a little bit ungrounded or unstable, boom, let me revisit that and see what I need to do. And anytime I want to go to the next level, it's all right, what can I start doing and what can I stop doing? And then we make our prior best our new baseline. Because the reality is, if we've done it in the past, we can do it again, and we need to quit giving away those gains. And that's again, that particular statement is one that some renowned coaches and others have said, that's it right there. Make your prior best your new baseline. It's a Josh Waitzkin line, the great author of The Art of Learning, who's a phenomenal teacher and writer. But those are some thoughts on how to create a protocol. And then again, we can systematically unpack that across different variables, et cetera.
And I love the simplicity of it. And I also love the empowering aspect of it, because if my baseline is my prior best, right, rather than going to all the times way before that, for example, where the gap was bigger maybe, or projecting all of the things that I cannot do, if I focus on that and I take one step from there, right, get some new resource, some new learning, right, allow the wind, if you will, that's shaking me, to allow me to become conscious of something that I need to learn, something that I can do to take better care of myself, then that is what strengthens. And I think that many of us are in a place of judgment, self-judgment, for what we're not doing right, or all the many things we haven't done right. And we forget to acknowledge where we are, the efforts that we've made to get where we are, and the fact that in this moment we're questioning what we could do better, right? Even if it's as simple as the exercise that you just gave us for the protocol. So I guess what my next question is around that concept of judgment, which many of us have been trained to do, self-judge, judge others. We're conditioned for it in many ways in this life. What do we do when that is the primary psychological kind of focus for us, consciously or unconsciously? How do we get out of that?
There's some really important ideas around the science of self-compassion. So we know that shame isn't helpful. And frankly, I don't think you don't want 0%. There's a certain level of, you got to hold high standards. And if you're consistently falling short of your standards, you need to pay attention to that. Like there's a level of, and Abraham Maslow, the great humanistic psychologist, was intense. He said in any given moment, you have a choice. You can step forward into growth or back into safety. Forward into growth, back into safety. I call it +1, -1, +1, -1. And at the end of the days in which you did not do that which you were capable of doing, you let a lot of gaps be present. Those are the days you're going to want to numb yourself. And he says every single time you deviate from what you know you could do, it makes an imprint on your consciousness. And again, he's intense about it. Now, that doesn't mean that you should shame yourself because you fell short. You want to bring a flashlight to it, remove the emotionality and the shame, but pay attention. Because that unrest, that feeling that you're having can be used positively. And again, Abraham Maslow would say, at a certain level of your development on his hierarchy of needs, And every single person listening to this right now has made the progression necessary to get to a point where the need to actualize, he called it the self-actualizing individual, becomes as real as your need to breathe. I call it soul oxygen. But again, that's not a cute thing. That's when you step back and you pay attention to that, you realize that the pain you're feeling is an indicator that you're falling short of what you can do. Now, you don't need to shame yourself about that, but you do want to pay attention to that because that feeling's not going away until you step back and start doing the things you know you could be doing. Now, again, shame is not a demonstration of wisdom and discipline and love and courage. You want to shine a flashlight of awareness, non-emotionally, but then also bring a hammer and start constructing a life that is more in integrity with what you know you could be doing. And then each time you fall short, approach it like the patron god of philosophy in the ancient world, Apollo, who was an archer, would approach it. The archer goes to a target, range or whatever you want to call it, and they don't hit bullseye every single target. But when they miss, you want to do an analysis and say, what could I have done differently next time so I can be more likely to hit the bullseye? But it's an interesting balance of holding those high standards, realizing you're never going to be perfect, which was another Abraham Maslow line. There are no perfect human beings. Great human beings, yes, but not one perfect human being. My joke is you and I aren't going to be the first. So we hold that awareness and that wisdom. We have self-compassion. And then we do what needs to get done so that we cultivate a self-image of that's like me, to do the things that I say I will do. And we can talk about confidence, which is part of the anti-fragile confidence we didn't get into, and building trust with yourself. But those are the thoughts. It's a dynamic, balance of holding your standards, embracing the constraints of reality, but then also doing the things you know you could be doing. And then that pain becomes a stimulus used properly to close the gap and to feel the joy that you do feel when you do so more often.
Yeah, and I think that the pausing to accept the pain that we're feeling in the moment is really important, right? So even as we kind of step in to do the thing that we've committed to doing through our protocol, I think the quick pause, even before that, of just allowing the feeling to be felt, right? I am feeling maybe shame, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling frustrated, anxious, worried, whatever that is really important because in my work, and I imagine you know this very well in your work with the many things and the many people that you've helped, is that there are certain parts of us that may be resistant from a protective lens to us being the highest potential, if you will, in that moment, because of some old patterns, some old belief systems. And so what about when those parts of us are behaving in a way that appears to be self-sabotage, right? So again, where there's like, we're all in, we're listening to you, Brian, we're ready to do this. And then, some other parts of us maybe hold us back, or, there is some discord within us. How do we handle that?
Yeah, with wisdom. So we step back and go, yep, that's the human experience. So the story I used to tell myself was something must be wrong with me. Everybody else got to figure it out. Brian's got to figure it out. Parents got to figure it out. I'm the one who's a loser. I'm the idiot that can't actually do the things I know I should be doing. This is a 2,500-year-old challenge. Whether you're talking about the ancient Greeks or Stoics, or go to the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, obviously the sacred text of Gandhi and India, features a war. It's a battlefield. You have a reluctant warrior, Arjuna, who doesn't want to go to battle, who, by the way, happens to be an archer. The greatest warrior of his era doesn't want to go to battle. And then his god, Krishna, advises him on the importance of doing what he needs to do, playing his role well. But that's an external representation of the metaphorical war within our own minds. So each of us has, the Greeks called it a daimon, which is the guiding spirit. It means spirit or soul, kind of that conscience, to use the Western idea, the best part of you. And then the diminutive of the daimon is demon. So we each also have a demonic voice, a eudaimonic, and then a demonic voice. And then the question is, well, which one wins? Well, which one are you paying attention to? Because they're both there. But again, we need to have the wisdom to know that that's part of the game and the human experience. And then we need to have the discipline. We need to have the self-mastery. We need to have the demonstration of the willpower to systematically architect our lives where we more consistently listen to the daimon, because that wisdom, that intelligence is always there. And then you systematically chip away, but you're never going to win that battle, ever. You're never going to get to a point where it's over. You get better at waging it, and you do the things that we talked about briefly, the eating, the moving, the sleeping, that make the frequency and the intensity of your downs less traumatic and catastrophic, but you're still always going to have them. That's part of the human experience. And you will never, ever, ever fully execute your protocol. You know, again, there are no perfect human beings, but just being aware of this, having the wisdom, and then there's a million other tools we can talk about, but just playfully, yeah, welcome to the human experience. That's part of the deal. And now it needs to get done. What do you want to see in your life? What do you think the right thing to do is right now? Do it. And just getting 3 to 5% better at this is going to change your life. 7-10% better if when life hits you, you slow down, you don't do the things that you knew you don't want to be doing, and you start more systematically doing those things that are best for you. It's truly it's life-changing. And then again, these aren't chores. The things we're talking about can't be viewed as chores. These are gifts you're giving to yourself. Because a lot of people listen to this and like, man, whatever, I don't want to do all those things. Another, group of things on my to-do list. We need to reframe that and identify the emotional experience, identify what we want, what we could do to close that gap, to feel that eudaimonic joy a little bit more consistently, and then joyfully do the next thing we feel called to do. Easier said than done. But those are some thoughts.
And that word of joyfully, right? To experience the joy that many of us really deeply seek to experience. I think it is very much living in the dichotomy of that. This lifelong, call it a battle, right? Between the daimon, as you called it, and the demon, right? The highest expression of ourselves and the shadows, because they're interdependent. We can't have one without the other. How do I know that I'm my best self if there isn't another part of me that is the opposite of that, right? This is a world of duality. And so I think it's the cycling between the two and being conscious of the energy moving to be able to shift and reset when we're in the down, so to speak. The wind is coming and we're feeling certain emotions, to be able to go back to our protocol, to go back to our disciplines and our habits, to be able to shift and reset more quickly, to reconnect with this soul higher part of ourselves. So I think the importance, as you're saying here, is the just softening of this, right? This ain't about perfection. This ain't about being, 100% optimized all the time necessarily as the objective, right? Oftentimes it's the result, or mostly 100% of the time when we're doing this consistently, when we've built a lot of resilience and anti-fragility, as you call it. I think the essence here is really just to have grace and to do our best, and to know, to really realize when we're not in our true essence, and to shift and reset that, even if it's, a little 1%, 1 degree shift, if you will. And I think that's why I honor the work that you do, because, through the app and through these daily practices and check-ins, and we're really priming people to have choice in those moments when the shadow appears, when the wind is coming, sometimes, low, just with such force that it's hard to even make a choice. And I think that is the activation of our heroic potential, is that the little micro things that we do moment by moment to build that anti-fragility, that resilience. So just a quick kind of extra point, if you don't mind, I'd love to get your thoughts, your input around a little bit more around that duality. And even from like a global level, right? The duality, right? Good and evil, right? If we were to call it that, right? Which, of course, even the evil, right, is thinking it's doing good, right? In its own personality, with what it's been conditioned to believe is true and real and good, right? But the whole like dichotomy, all of these different dichotomies in the discord that's going on in our world, what do you think is going to make the difference? What do the leaders of our world need to hear?
I think I have heroes on this wall and then that wall. So every morning in my meditation practice, I do a few different things. One of them is I invoke the spirit of my heroes. So on this wall, I have Ralph Waldo Emerson, Abraham Lincoln, Marcus Aurelius, and then two living heroes of mine, John Mackey and Phil Stutz, and then Joseph Campbell. Anyway, Ralph Waldo Emerson tells me to trust myself, but then Abraham Lincoln says, win the Civil War. But when he says it to me, he's not talking about the Civil War outside of my consciousness. He's talking about the one within my own consciousness. So I spend essentially no time thinking about the geopolitical landscape and all the things going on in the world out there. I focus on my consciousness and I focus on helping individuals that are part of our community who go through our training programs become the best version of themselves such that they can idiosyncratically serve their communities profoundly. So the war I'm concerned about is the war going on within my head, your head, whoever's listening to this right now. And there's more than enough to keep ourselves busy for multiple lifetimes within that. And it's my belief that to the extent those of us who are in positions of leadership do the hard work to move from victim, complaining, blaming, gossiping, criticizing, pulling the covers over our heads and trying to ignore reality, and do the hard work to become the best version of ourselves, we have a shot at solving those challenges. We don't unless enough of us actually do the hard work. And it's hard work. To be a hero in ancient Greece, the word meant protector. It didn't mean killer of bad guys or tough guy. It meant protector. The hero's secret weapon was love. The word courage comes from the word for heart. Love and courage are the same. When you have enough love and you're willing to do the hard work to go to the front lines, you're not complaining when you're a hero. The victim becomes the creator, becomes the hero. And again, it's hard work to build the strength for two in a world like this where everything is falling apart. We don't need more victims. We need more people who are willing to do the work within their own consciousness to bring it back to the question and the global challenges. My own mind gives me enough to work on, and having the humility to have the wisdom, the discipline, the love, the courage, the gratitude, the hope, the curiosity, the zest. Those are the virtues most highly correlated, science says, ancient wisdom traditions and faith traditions say, are highly correlated with being your best self and enjoying the process, by the way. So that's what I focus on, and that's what I encourage people to focus on. We all win the war that exists, often moment to moment, certainly day by day. Then we cultivate the strength to go out and lead effectively and truly be worthy of that position and make a contribution. And again, when we each humbly yet heroically play our roles well, I know that if enough of us do that, we can change the world. The question is, can we get enough of us to do that fast enough to tip the scales to achieve, from my vantage point, the near impossible 51% we talked about? But anyway, again, long answer, but I always come back to the individual in aggregate. That's how I think we solve the societal. And people listening who are in the political world and leading in that domain, or in the corporate world, or again, we're blessed to work with people within the military in each of those other areas. As we each become the best version of ourselves and influence our world in the way that we do, it's exciting to see what can happen in aggregate over a certain period of time.
I am very much in congruence with what you're sharing. And I believe that the way to get, 51% of our world's population flourishing by the year 2050 is through doing our own inner work. And when we have people, leaders, change makers in our world that have a very high amplitude of energy, and by energy, I'm also referring to feeding the field around their body with love. This high coherence that of course has a tremendous effect on the people around them, whether it's their teams, their communities, and so on, and then on a global level. And through the Institute of Heart Math, I'm not sure if you've heard of Heart Math. I'm a trainer with Heart Math, and I'm trained in their teams programs, and have had the head of research there on our podcast a couple of times speaking about the Global Coherence Initiative. And we do have research absolutely proving that when enough individuals, Heart Math believes somewhere between 350 to about 400,000 of our leaders in the world are very heart coherent and a fragilely resilient, very congruent, leading themselves first, as you call it, being their own heroes, and managing that inner war. with compassion and patience and grace, that we can absolutely tilt the scales and change the trajectory from discord to more harmony. And then that energetically will impact the individuals, so that we really do have over 51% of the population flourishing. So it's both an individual level, but also we can work with the global, which will then energetically shift the field, which then shifts, of course, individuals wherever they are in the world. And I 100% believe it's possible, and it does take people like yourself to get these messages out there. And it's not just messages; it's the tools and the accountability and the practices that I think will get us there, because we all know knowledge is not enough.
Amen. And I kind of moved my heroes around, but I got Bruce Lee back there for a number of reasons, but in part representing ancient Chinese philosophy. I've got Lao Tzu that kind of comes in and out. Etc. But this is ancient Chinese philosophy. So we've talked a lot about the West. We moved a little bit east with the Bhagavad Gita. But we go further east. So in ancient China, Lao Tzu, Confucius, what did they try to do? So they wanted individuals to show up and live in Wu Wei, right? Which we translate as effortless action, which when I first heard that, I'm like, what does that mean? I don't do anything, but things happen. But the real translation is effortless right action. So the ancient Chinese philosophers trained their leaders to effortlessly do the virtuous thing. Why? Because when you do that, you cultivate what they call Da, is spelled D-E in English, which is translated as moral charisma or virtuous charismatic power. And neuroscientists can study this and prove exactly what you just said from the heart math perspective, which is we evolved to detect congruence and coherence. And literally, goosebumps knowing there's resonance and coherence in what we're talking about. So we can approach this from different levels, but people want to follow those people. So that's why the leaders trained in this way. I call it soul force, which is what Gandhi named his movement Satyagraha, which we translate as nonviolent resistance, which is a horrible translation of Satyagraha. Satyagraha, which was the power with which Gandhi freed India without going to war. Satyagraha means truth force, or virtue force, or love force, or soul force. Martin Luther King quoted his hero, Gandhi, in his I Have a Dream speech, talking about soul force. What did Gandhi and MLK and all the other heroes we admire have in common? That. They had the heart math coherence, they had the moral charisma, they had the soul force. And that's the seventh objective in the book. It's the outcome of being in integrity with all the things we're talking about, that you become alive. You become, as Campbell says, transparent to the transcendent. And he says there's nothing more important for you to do than that. And that to me is my personal commitment to trying to do that, however imperfectly in my own life, cultivating that within my kids, within my team, our community of coaches. That's it. So we're fully, of course, aligned on the importance of it. And I love the math, the 400,000 roughly true leaders, and all of us are leaders in whatever capacity. But it's inspiring and but also humbling. I mean, it is not easy to do those things, especially when we're feeling the enervation and the burnout. Good news is it does get easier as we program the basal ganglia and kind of that ancient part of our brain stem, so that it becomes easier to do the right thing, right? Again, all done with that love, with that commitment to something bigger than ourselves as fuel for the moments in which we need to make the choice. Well, think of your kids, think of your colleagues, or whoever it is that you're committed to having the strength for too, in those moments. And to me, that's what it's all about. And I love the way that you framed it.
And thank you for completing us here with this concept of love, right? Whether we call it, the non-violent resistance, that love force, that soul force. And I think that, I didn't quite tattoo it on my hand yet, but one of the things that I've trademarked and that I teach is called the heart of war, right? You mentioned, right, Lao Tzu and of course the art of war, the heart of war. And that is first and foremost that inner war, as you said, within ourselves, with our shadows, as we might call them, and just giving compassion and then making a choice to activate our heroic potential and really living into everything that you teach. And I think that will get us there to this beautiful mission that we started our conversation with today. So really, I'm just giving you a big, huge hug. And
I feel it. The heart of war. That is beautiful. Oh, I love that. What a wonderful frame. I hope to hear more about that.
thank
That's
you.
such a cool, compelling, um, creative expression of all the things we've been talking about. Bless you.
Yeah, bless you too, and your beautiful family and your community and all of our planet. Thank you again. And
I
how can
appreciate it.
how can people learn more about you, all the work that you do, that your coaches do?
Yeah, Heroic Public Benefit Corporation is the name of our organization. You can learn more about Heroic at heroic.us, heroic.us, or in your iOS or Android, app stores. Heroic, we're the training platform. And then the book, Arete, Arete. You can find that wherever you get books, and learn more and get kind of the forward and early chapters and whatnot at heroic.us/book if you want to learn more before you get it.
Well, keep up the good work, channeling the wisdom of all of these greats around you, and thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you, Vered.